Hello, I'm Tim Smith, the pastor of the Fayetteville Cumberland Presbyterian Church here in Fayetteville, Tennessee, and we're glad to have you with us today, whether you're watching on our church YouTube channel or on Fayetteville Public Utilities Channel 6. Certainly glad to have you with us today for this time of worship. I will go ahead and express some apologies for my voice today. Got a cold of some kind. My daughter and I both got it. We did get tested to make sure it wasn't anything more serious, but apparently it's just a cold, and hopefully my voice is going to hold up until we get to the end of our time together. And I just ask for your understanding, and hopefully by next week it'll be a little bit better. We are glad to have you with us, and I want to invite you to come to worship with us in person if you get the opportunity. We're located at 1015 Lewisburg Highway here in Fayetteville. We have two worship services. Our traditional worship in the sanctuary is at 10:30 a.m. and our a little bit more contemporary, or a little bit more casual anyway, worship is at 8:30 a.m. In the fellowship hall, and we'd love to have you come to either, or hey, we'll be glad for you to come to both those services if you want to. Today I'm going to be talking about one of the probably more famous miracles of Jesus. It is the time that Jesus walks on the water. Sometimes we hear expressions about somebody walking on water, and it is a story of Jesus that catches our ear. It gets our attention because we know that no one can walk on water. You can swim through water. You can maybe be able to wade through water, at least until it gets to a certain depth. You can float on top of water, but you cannot walk on it. Yet we hear in this story that Jesus is able to walk on water. And that's amazing, isn't it? I think sometimes we get a little bit maybe desensitized, might be the word, to the miracles of Jesus and the great things he's able to do. And when we see that he does them, we kind of just get used to him doing the impossible and are not maybe as impressed by that as the people in his day or the people that first heard these stories did. But let's see what Matthew's got to say about it. I'm reading from chapter 14 of the Gospel of Matthew, beginning in verse 22. Immediately, Jesus made the disciples get into the boat and go on ahead to the other side while he dismissed the crowds. And after he had dismissed the crowds, he went up the mountain by himself to pray. When evening came, he was there alone, but by this time the boat, battered by the waves, was far from the land, for the wind was against them, and early in the morning he came walking toward them on the sea. But when the disciples saw him walking on the sea, they were terrified, saying, "It is a ghost." And they cried out in fear. But immediately Jesus spoke to them and said, "Take heart, it is I, do not be afraid." Peter answered, "Lord, if it is you, command me to come out to you on the water." He said, "Come." So Peter got out of the boat and started walking on the water and came toward Jesus. But when he noticed the strong wind, he became frightened, and beginning to sink, he cried out, "Lord, save me." Jesus immediately reached out his hand and caught him, saying to him, "You of little faith, why did you doubt?" When they got in the boat, the wind ceased, and those in the boat worshipped him, saying, "Truly, you are the Son of God." And may God bless the reading of his holy word and incline its hearing to our hearts and our minds and its application to our lives this day. You know, in this story, we see Jesus able to do something that nobody can do. He's able to walk on water. But you know, as I looked at this story over the last few days, I realized there's something even more amazing than Jesus walking on the water. And you may think, well, what's more amazing than that in this story? It's that Peter walked on the water. Yes, Peter walked on the water. You notice that? Peter said, "If you are Christ, if you are Jesus, then command me to get out of the boat and walk on the water." And he said, "Well, come on out here." And Peter came and walked on the water. at least for a time, before he began to sink. That should give us heart today. That should give us some hope that not only is Jesus able to do the impossible for himself, and God able to do impossible things, but God can empower us and allow us to also do the impossible. No matter how impossible or infeasible it may seem, yet Jesus is able to give us the strength to do it. So what was it that allowed Peter to walk on the water? What was it that allowed Jesus to work through him so that he could do the impossible? And in turn, what can we do in our life so that Jesus may also work through us to do the impossible? Well, we could talk for a long time about all the attributes, I guess, that are involved, but I think it boils down to faith. Peter had faith, didn't he? Peter had faith to get out of the boat. You know, it doesn't matter how much you talk about something. It doesn't matter how much you think about something. It's only when you put those thoughts and those feelings into action that it really matters. See, we talk a lot about faith in the church. Just about every sermon that's preached deals with faith to some extent. We sing songs about faith. We have lessons about faith. We read devotions about faith. Faith is what we are, aren't we? We're of the Christian faith. We believe. But do we really believe? See, sometimes I think we believe, or we maybe want to believe, but do we really believe? And do we believe enough to put it into action? Now, later in this sermon, I'm going to kind of beat up on Peter, you might say, a little bit. Peter is an all too human personality. Sometimes he does great things, and sometimes he disappoints our Lord in great ways. And I think Peter is a very relatable character. I think we can relate to him very easy because he's a lot like us. At times, he's got it together, and at other times, he falls short. But I will give Peter credit. He keeps trying, and we have to as well. See, we can say what we want to about Peter, but Peter had faith here. He got out of the boat. There were 12 disciples in that boat. But not all 12 got out, did they? Not all 12 trusted Jesus to do it. Not all 12 said, "Hey, Jesus, if it's you, let me walk on the water." That took a lot of faith, didn't it? And I'll tell you what took more faith than that was actually stepping out of that boat and putting that foot on top of the water. Can you imagine what that must have been like? You know, I mean, I guess if you had faith, you wouldn't be wondering at all, but there's some level of us that would wonder, well, is our foot going to keep going down? Or are we really going to be able to walk on the water? What's it going to be like to walk on the water? And as we start to walk, you know, that has to be a very awing event that just leaves us awestruck that we're able to walk on the water. Peter got out of the boat. He put his faith into action. And we must be sure that we are putting our faith into action. We can talk about how great God is. We can talk about how God can take care of us. We can talk about how God can solve any problem. But do we really turn our problems over to the Lord? Do we really trust him to do it? Or is that just church talk and religious speak? Or do we really believe it and put it into action? We notice, though, that once Peter begins his walk across the water, he's not able to sustain it for a long period of time. I think he could have, but he loses his focus, doesn't he? He gets sidetracked. He gets distracted. The Bible says that he begins to notice the winds and the waves around him. And when he begins to see those winds and waves, he takes his focus off of the Lord. After all, the only reason he was able to walk on the water was not of his own ability, but of the ability of Jesus Christ working through him. And the only reason we're able to do many of the things we're able to do is because of the power of God. He gives us strength and ability to do things when otherwise we would not be able to handle it. But we must keep our focus on Jesus as well. See, he began to notice all the things around him that could go wrong, and that's fairly reasonable. I think that's probably part of our human nature. We live in an unsettled world with many troubles and challenges, and those challenges are very real. You know, you think about him walking on the water. He's walking on the water in the middle of a storm. There are waves, the wind's blowing, lightning crashing, flashing, and thunder crashing. A lot going on here, a lot of things to be scared of. You know, to be out in the middle of a thunderstorm is a scary event. Not to mention to be out in the middle of water in a storm. Those winds and waves had the ability to kill him. He could drown. And I'm sure there was a part of his mind that was sitting there saying, "Hey, Peter, you can't be serious. Nobody can walk on water. How are you doing this? Look at this storm around you. Look at the wind and waves. How are you going to be able to keep going?" And see, he began to allow his human mind to think. He began to think rationally and logically. You know, rational thought is a wonderful thing. I'm so thankful of the education that I've been blessed to receive. I know there are many people much more educated than myself, but I am thankful to learning things of science, the things of the modern age. But sometimes our rational thought can get us in trouble. Now, there's a place for rational thought and logic. Certainly, it's what separates us from the other creatures of the world. It allows us to solve many of human problems that exist. But sometimes we have to think with faith. See, when Peter was in the boat, he was thinking through faith. He said, "Jesus, if it's you, allow me to walk on the water." Well, that's not a logical or rational statement. That's a statement of faith, isn't it? But once he got out there and he began to see all that was happening around him, and he began to think, "Oh, I might drown. Oh, I might sink. I might get struck by lightning. That wave might knock me down." All of those are very logical concerns, aren't they? Somehow we have to find a balance between those two. Now, I have to say that in our world today, it seems like more and more we are drawn to the extreme opinions. There are those that believe we should only think rationally and logically, and there is no room for faith. They believe if something cannot be proven by the scientific method and proven to their satisfaction, then it cannot be real, and thus it's false. On the other extreme, there are those in the faith community, even some Christians, that don't seem to want to allow any room for reason, logic, or rational thought in our belief system. They believe that there is no room for science, and that science is an enemy of the Bible and an enemy of Christianity. I strongly disagree with that. I think there is a balance that can be found. For all of us have to be able to think with faith and also think logically. We each have to wrestle with that ourselves, and we have to find satisfaction and peace with where we find ourselves on the spectrum of faith and reason. But there's room for both. Let us never be deceived by those that think we must choose one and reject the other. Peter began to think logically about all the things that could go wrong, and sometimes we do that ourselves. we start to think about all the things that could go wrong in our life. We might get cancer. We might have a heart condition. We might lose our job. They might repossess our car. We might get divorced. We start looking around and we see all the problems that we deal with in our life and in the life of our family, and there are many things to worry about. There are many things to be concerned about. There are way too many things that could go wrong. But see, the key word is it could go wrong. It does not mean that it will. We have to trust that God will guide us through that and will prevent some of those things from going wrong. And when they do go wrong, he will give us strength and guidance to get through that time of difficulty. Now, there's one thing else here I want us to see in this story about Peter, because as I said earlier, Peter is a person that is very easy to relate to, because he's a lot like me, and he's probably a lot like a lot of you all that are watching. He's very human. He's a very impulsive personality. He gets really excited one minute, and then he falls the next. Now, Peter was one of the very early followers of Jesus. And there are times when he shows amazing faith. For instance, when he gets out of the boat here to walk on the water. We know that there are times that the other disciples don't seem to really understand what is going on, but Peter seems to get it. We know that on the day before our Lord was crucified, Peter told Jesus that he would die with him and not allow Jesus to be put to death. And I believe that when Peter said that, he was sincere. After all, on the night when Jesus was arrested, Peter drew his sword to defend Jesus, but Jesus told him to put it away. Then later, he followed Jesus from a distance as they took him into the governor's palace and into the courtyards there near the temple. Now, the other disciples seem to have followed. They seem to have scattered. Peter, at least, is watching what is going on and concerned about what is going on. Those are impressive qualities. However, some people noticed Peter and they began to ask him, "Aren't you the one we saw with Jesus the other day? Aren't you one of his followers?" And he denied our Lord. He said, "I never knew him. I don't know him. I don't know who you're talking about." And there he fell again. Now, Peter was sincere. He meant well. He was well-intentioned. A lot like us. We mean well. We want to try to do what God wants us to do. We want to try to serve him in the best way we can, but sometimes we get distracted. And there are many things that can distract us. The thing that seems to often distract Peter is fear. When they approach him and ask him, "Hey, didn't we see you with Jesus the other day?" He immediately denies that, not because he does not love Jesus, but because he is afraid that he may be on the cross beside Jesus. He's afraid for his life. Here in this story, when he is walking on the water, why does he begin to sink? Why does he lose faith? Because he is afraid. He's afraid he'll drown. Fear. Fear. This world we live in has many things we could be afraid of, but we have to remember that God is greater than any of these things. After all, if Jesus is able to walk on the water and able to allow Peter to walk on the water for however many steps he did, why would Peter think he couldn't continue? God has brought us this far in life. He's brought us through a lot of things, a lot of tough times. What makes us think he will not continue? See, we look around and see all the problems of our age, all the problems of our life. But we have to remember that no matter what problems we have, no matter what is keeping us up at night, God is greater than any of those problems and challenges. But I think it's important for us to realize that, like Peter, sometimes we stumble and fall. We don't plan it that way. We don't mean to do it, but sometimes we do. But what's Jesus do with Peter after he sinks? Does he say, Peter, you of little faith, you better swim for it? Does he say, Peter, you're going to drown? And even after he gets back into the boat and they get to shore, does he fire Peter? Tell him to pack up his things and leave because of his lack of faith? No, he doesn't. He reaches down and he pulls Peter up out of the water. He saves him from drowning, and then he quiets and stills the storm. That's a whole nother event of itself. A whole nother sermon could be preached on that subject. The amazing power of our Lord. See, our God is awesome because Jesus not only had walked on the water and got Peter to walk on the water, but he had Peter walking on the water in the middle of a storm, didn't he? He didn't just go out there when it was perfect conditions, ideal conditions, when the Sea of Galilee was just still as could be. He did it during the middle of a storm. And Jesus is the same way with us. He's not just there for us when things are going perfectly. If that was the case, he rarely would be with us because rarely does anything go perfectly. But he was with him even in the storm. He was able to do the impossible even when it was in adverse conditions. And it is the same with us. Through Jesus Christ, we too can do the impossible, even when the odds are against us, even when everything is stacked against us. And maybe we failed the Lord in the past. Maybe we've disappointed him. Maybe we've lacked faith, or we've not been as faithful as we should have been. But just like Peter, Jesus is not through with us. This same Peter that doubted, this same Peter that later denied Jesus, this same Peter that lost faith out in the middle of the water and began to sink, is the same Peter that Jesus says, you are the rock on which I will build my church. And he is the same Peter that is such an active worker in the early church. Just because we stumble and fall does not mean that God is through with us. God still has a plan for us. And no matter how many times we lose faith, no matter how many times we stumble and start to sink as Peter did, Jesus is there to lift us up so that we can continue on. So let us go forward in faith, knowing that through Christ, all things are possible. Let us pray. Gracious God, we do thank you for this time we've had together today to worship. We ask that you would be with those that are sick and those that are suffering this day. May you bring healing to their bodies. May you give encouragement to those that are discouraged. And Lord, to those of us that have sometimes not been as faithful as you would have us to be, renew us, recharge us, strengthen us. Let us feel your presence and continue to use us for the work of your kingdom. Help us, Lord, to have faith even in difficult times, and help us to always remember that with you, all things are possible. And it is in the name of Jesus we ask these things. Amen. Do want to again mention, we'd love to have you come and worship with us. We're located at 1015 on the Lewisburg Highway here in Fayetteville. We have 2 worship services. The first one's at 8:30 a.m., casual service. 10:30 a.m., our more traditional service. And we would love for you to come and have an opportunity to get to know you a little bit better. And we'll roll out the red carpet for you. Hope you have a blessed day and a blessed week.